For this video, we are going to talk about the crime of sedition. This is found in Article 139 of the Revised Penal Code. Article 139, Sedition, how committed. The crime of sedition is committed by persons who rise publicly and tumultuously in order to attain by force, intimidation, or by other means outside of legal methods any of the following objects. Number 1, to prevent the promulgation or execution of any law or the holding of any popular election. Number 2, to prevent the national government or any provincial or municipal government or any public officer thereof from freely exercising its or his functions or prevent the execution of any administrative order. Number 3, to inflict any act of hate or revenge upon the person or property of any public officer or employee. Number 4, to commit for any political or social end any act of hate or revenge against private persons or any social class. And number 5, to despoil for any political or social end any person, municipality or province, or the national government of all its property or any part thereof. These are the elements of sedition. Number 1, let the offenders rise publicly and tumultuously. Rising publicly means the gathering must be made public. It cannot be done in secret, just like in the crime of rebellion. And it is in this instance that sedition is similar with rebellion because the offenders must rise publicly. On the other hand, tumultuous or tumultuously means loud, emotional, involving violence, confusion, or disorder. So, in the crime of sedition, both these circumstances must exist. The offenders rise publicly and at the same time tumultuously. Is it necessary that they take up arms or they carry arms? No. In sedition, it is not necessary that the offenders take arms against the government. Taking up arms against the government is essential only in the crime of rebellion. It is enough that they rise publicly and that at the same time it is loud, emotional, involving violence, confusion, or disorder. Second element, that the offenders employ force, intimidation, or other means outside of legal methods. So it is not enough that they rise publicly and tumultuously. The offenders here must do something after rising publicly and tumultuously. And in this regard, sedition is actually a crime of dissent or protest using means outside of the legal methods. It is done in excess of the legal means authorized under the freedoms of expression and assembly clauses of the Constitution. Why do I say that they are, or the offenders in sedition do something in excess of the legal means? Because they employ force and intimidation. Yes, you have the right to protest, you have the right to dissent, you have the right to oppose, you have the right to criticize, but you must do it in a lawful way. You should not go beyond what is allowed by law. And using force or intimidating the government or intimidating a social class or other persons or public officers for any political or social end will already constitute using means outside of the legal methods. They are means not authorized under the freedoms of expression and assembly clauses of the Constitution. Third element, that the offenders employ any of those means force, intimidation, or other means to attain any of the following objects or purposes. That's why I said a while ago that after the offenders rise publicly and tumultuously, they will then use or employ force, intimidation, or other means outside of legal methods to attain the following or any of the following objects or purposes. First object or purpose is, for example, to prevent the promulgation or execution of any law or the holding of any popular election. That is one of the purposes of sedition. For example, candidate X, who feared that he was going to lose in his re-election bid, barricaded the school where the voting is to be had and threatened the voters to prevent them from casting their votes. Second object or purpose of sedition: to prevent the national government or any provincial or municipal government or any public officer thereof from freely exercising its or his functions, or prevent the execution of any administrative order. For example, Mayor X, who lost in his re-election bid, barricaded the municipal hall to prevent the new mayor from exercising his administrative and public functions. The act of barricading here is already a means outside of the legal methods. Because if Mayor X is protesting the election of the new mayor, then he must go through the legal and proper procedure. Because by barricading the municipal hall, to repeat, it will what? Effectively prevent the public officer concerned from exercising or fulfilling his duties as the new municipal mayor. Another object or purpose of sedition is to inflict any act of hate or revenge upon the person or property of any public officer or employee. So, the act of hate or revenge here can be either upon the person of the public officer or upon the property of the public officer. For example, candidate X, together with his supporters, set fire to the car of his political rival who defeated him in the last election. Fourth object or purpose of sedition: to commit for any political or social end any act of hate or revenge against private persons or any social class. So, if you notice here, the person subjected to the act of hate or revenge here are private persons or any social class, not public officers. For example, X and 100 of his companions, all of whom were laborers, banded together and physically assaulted their employers to protest against their abusive and unjust labor practices and their continued or supposed oppression of the poor people working under them. So you can see here in this example that the assault made by them against their employers has a social end. And what is that social end? To protest against their abusive employers who have been oppressing them. They believe that they should take the law in their own hands and do something to suppress the abusive practices of their employers. The intention may be good, but no matter how noble the purpose is, if you do something outside of the legal means, employing force, intimidation, or violence, then you break the law. You thereby commit the crime of sedition. Last object or purpose of sedition: That is, to despoil for any political or social end, any person, municipality or province, or the national government of all its property or any part thereof. Here, the assault is not against the person or the public officer himself. The assault is against the property because the phrase or the word despoil or to despoil means to steal or to violently remove or to plunder. For example, X and 100 of his companions, all of whom were laborers, banded together and ransacked the houses of their respective employers and stole all the jewelry they could find in order to get what is supposedly due them as employees and to protest against their abusive and unjust labor practices. Of course, you might ask, Fiscal, hindi ba mga common crimes yung pinagagawa ng mga offenders sa mga example na binigay mo? Yes. But, hindi ba, Fiscal, na dapat yung common crimes talaga ang i-charge, hindi lang sedition? The answer to that is common crimes that are committed in furtherance of or committed during the course of the crime of sedition will not be absorbed in the crime of sedition. They will remain as separate crimes. So, if I were the prosecutor in this case, not only I will file against the offenders here the crime of sedition, but I will also file whatever common crimes they may have committed in furtherance of the sedition, or whatever common crimes they might have committed during the course of their seditious acts. So much so that we cannot do away without making some important distinctions between the crime of sedition and rebellion. So, in the crime of sedition, it is enough that the public uprising is tumultuous. On the other hand, in the crime of rebellion, the public uprising is always coupled with taking up arms against the government. Also, in sedition, the purpose of the offenders may be political or social, as I have already discussed in my previous slide, referring to the objects and purposes of the crime of sedition in Article 139. On the other hand, in rebellion, the purpose is always political. That is to overthrow the government or to remove from the allegiance of the government the whole or any part of the territory of the Philippines, as so stated in Article 134. Another distinction is that, and this was what I explained in the previous slide, common crimes are not absorbed in sedition. And for example, to inflict any act of hate or revenge against the public officer, the offenders killed that public officer. Two crimes are thereby committed. One is sedition and the other is direct assault with murder. Because, as I said, common crimes are not absorbed in sedition. However, with respect to the use of an unlicensed firearm, what I mean is if the force, intimidation, or violence was committed with the use of an unlicensed or loose firearm, such use of an unlicensed or loose firearm will be absorbed, okay, in the crime of sedition, because that is so provided in Section 29 of RA 10591, that such use will only be considered as an aggravating circumstance in the crime of sedition. But with respect to the other common crimes like murder or robbery, for example, they will not be absorbed. They remain as separate crimes. On the other hand, in rebellion, as you have already known and as I have already explained in my previous video, Common crimes committed in furtherance of or during the course of the rebellion are absorbed by the rebellion. In Ligue versus People, the accused in that case claimed that the crime he committed was only sedition because the uprising, according to him, took place only in a municipality which is a small territory. The Supreme Court ruled otherwise, saying that what distinguishes sedition from rebellion is not the extent of the territory covered by the uprising, but the object or purpose at which the uprising is aimed. In this particular case, according to the Supreme Court, the purpose of the uprising was to obtain the independence of certain portions of the territory from the government and withdrawing it from the authority of the central government. This is not one of the purposes of sedition. So, the Supreme Court here did not side with the accused because the accused claimed that if he ever committed a crime, his crime was only that of sedition and not of rebellion, but the Supreme Court did not agree with him. The Supreme Court ruled, to repeat, that he is guilty of rebellion and not of sedition, because what is controlling is the object or purpose at which the uprising is aimed. Okay?